I never thought I'd hear those words from my own family.
Shut up, you widow.
He spat across the dinner table, his voice dripping with contempt. My fork clattered onto my plate. The roast chicken suddenly tasted like ash. I felt every eye in the room turn on me, some with pity, others with indifference. No one spoke up. Not my sister-in-law, who I'd nursed through her darkest days. Not my nephew, whose college tuition I'd quietly helped pay. I'd spent years holding this family together after my husband died, keeping birthdays bright, holidays warm. But in that single moment, it all shattered. My heart felt like it had cracked open, raw and exposed. I wanted to scream, to ask why, but the silence from the others told me everything I needed to know. They didn't care. I stood up slowly, my legs trembling like they'd forgotten how to hold me. I didn't say a word. I walked out, leaving behind the family I thought I knew. But what they didn't know was that life has a way of settling its own debts. And before the week was out, karma would come knocking, harder than they'd ever imagined. Before I tell you how it all unfolded, hit that like button, share where you're watching from, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this. Now, let's dive in.
I'm Caroline Smith, 67, a retired nurse who poured her heart into her family and community. I always believed love and loyalty would see me through, but that night, when they called me a widow like it was an insult, I realized sometimes family can be the sharpest knife in your back.
I was never one to count the things I'd given. After Henry died, I made it my mission to keep the family together. I stepped in where he left off, helped my sister-in-law with her rent when she lost her job, babysat for my nephews so they could go on their date nights, made sure every Christmas was still magical even though it broke my heart to do it alone. They called me the glue that held us all together. And maybe I was, but even glue can crack. After Henry's funeral, they leaned on me like I was made of steel. I handled paperwork, made phone calls, arranged dinners so nobody had to face the silence alone. And in those moments, I felt like I mattered, like I was more than just the woman left behind. Henry and I never had children, but I treated his family like they were my own. His brother Mark would call me to ask for advice about his teenage daughter, and I'd stay on the phone with her for hours, telling her it was okay to feel different, that life wasn't always fair. My niece, Susan, would drop by after school for cookies and stories about Henry's old truck. I'd smile, remembering how proud he was the day he bought it. When they needed help with bills, I dipped into my savings, no questions asked. I even loaned Mark money to fix the roof on his house. Every time, I told myself, this is what family does. You don't leave anyone behind. But slowly, I started noticing things. Small cracks, like the time they planned a family vacation and forgot to invite me. Or when Mark's wife Angie would roll her eyes whenever I offered to help with dinner. It stung, but I brushed it off. I thought, grief does funny things to people. Maybe they just needed time. When Susan graduated high school, they threw a big party. I spent days making her a scrapbook of all the milestones Henry had missed. Her first steps, her prom night, the college acceptance letter. I thought it would show her how much he loved her, even if he wasn't there to say it himself. She barely looked at it. Mark said thanks, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Still, I kept giving. I kept believing that someday they'd see how much I cared, because that's what Henry would have wanted. And on that night, the night that changed everything, I showed up at Mark's house with a casserole and a bottle of wine, hoping to bring a little warmth to a cold, rainy evening. I had no idea that the warmth I'd given them all these years would be repaid with words so cold they'd freeze the blood in my veins. That night was supposed to be just another family dinner, just like so many others I'd organized or helped cook, so they didn't have to lift a finger. I'd baked a lemon meringue pie, Henry's favorite, thinking maybe it'd bring a smile to Mark's face. Maybe it'd remind them that I still remembered what family was supposed to mean. I walked into the house, arms full of the pie, a small salad, and the same bottle of wine I'd brought so many times before. The living room buzzed with chatter and laughter. Mark's wife, Angie, was holding court in the kitchen, telling a story about work. I thought maybe tonight would feel like old times. I smiled, put the pie on the counter, and hung my coat on the rack by the door. I started to offer to help set the table, but Angie shot me a look, like I'd just stepped in mud. "Oh, you're here," she said. "Yeah, just put it there." I tried to ignore the tone. Maybe she was just tired, but something in the air felt off, like I was standing in a room full of people who knew a joke I didn't. Dinner started with the usual small talk, Mark complaining about the price of gas, Angie whining about the new neighbor. I sat quietly, waiting for a chance to jump in, maybe to share a story about Henry, or just to be part of the conversation. But every time I opened my mouth, someone else spoke over me. Then came the moment that changed everything. Mark was halfway through a story about his boss when I made a little joke, something harmless, just to lighten the mood. The room fell silent. Mark's eyes flicked to Angie, who smirked and shook her head. "God, will you just shut up, you widow?" she said, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. The words hit me like a slap, echoing in my ears. My stomach dropped. I tried to laugh it off, but no one else did. Even Mark just stared at his plate. I looked around the table, hoping someone would say something, anything. But all I saw were smirks and sideways glances. Susan, who used to sit in my kitchen after school, had her head down, phone in hand, thumbs moving so fast I couldn't keep up. Mark cleared his throat like he was about to speak, but then he took another bite of his food and said nothing. For a moment, I felt like I was outside my own body, watching the scene unfold like a stranger. My heart pounded in my chest. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Tears stung at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Angie's smirk widened. "Oh, come on, it was just a joke," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Don't be so sensitive. You're always so emotional." That was it. I knew right then that I was no longer family to them, just an extra plate at the table, a leftover from a man who'd left them too soon. They'd already moved on, and I was just the shadow of the life I'd built with Henry. I stood up, my chair scraping the floor louder than I meant it to. The table fell silent. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice trembling. "I think I've overstayed my welcome." No one tried to stop me. No one called my name. I grabbed my coat, my purse, and walked out of that house, out of the life I'd tried so hard to hold together. And as I stood on the front steps, the cold night air biting at my skin, I made a promise to myself. They might have taken my trust, my laughter, and the years I'd given them, but I would never let them take my dignity.
I drove home that night in silence, headlights blurry from tears that wouldn't stop. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white, but it was the only thing keeping me steady. I couldn't believe what had happened. The words, "Shut up, you widow," kept echoing in my head like a cruel chant. By the time I reached my little house, the one Henry and I bought together all those years ago, I felt like a ghost of the woman who had walked into that dinner. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the pie I'd baked. It was still warm, the meringue perfect and golden. A silly, fragile offering that hadn't even earned me a seat at their table. The next morning, I woke up hoping it had all been a bad dream. I called Mark, praying he'd pick up and say it was a misunderstanding. He answered on the third ring. "Hey, Mom," he said, like nothing had happened. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Mark, about last night," he cut me off. "Look, Angie was just joking. She's been under a lot of stress lately. You can't take everything so personally." A hot, bitter pain settled in my chest. "She called me a widow. Like it was an insult," I whispered, my voice trembling. He sighed. "Mom, you're a widow. Don't make this a bigger deal than it is." I felt the phone slip from my hand, crashing onto the kitchen counter. I picked it up just in time to hear the dial tone. He'd hung up on me. Like I was a problem he didn't have time to deal with. That was the moment the dam broke. Memories flooded back, like the time I'd paid their mortgage when Mark got laid off. The holidays I'd cooked every meal, bought every gift. The countless hours I'd spent babysitting, driving Susan to soccer practice, or helping Angie plan their parties. I thought I was building a family that would love me back. But the cracks had been there all along. Little things, the way Mark brushed off my opinions, how Angie sighed every time I called, the way Susan barely looked up from her phone when I visited. I'd chalked it up to generational differences. Kids are busy these days, I'd told myself. They don't mean it. But now I saw the truth. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as an obligation, a leftover from a marriage they'd already moved past. They'd taken my generosity, my time, my heart, and they'd turned it into something disposable. I tried one more time, sent a text to Susan, just a simple, "Hey sweetie, can we talk?" She didn't respond, not that day, not the next. Days turned into a week and my phone stayed silent. I started to notice other betrayals, small but sharp. The photos on their social media that never included me, the family gatherings I'd only hear about afterward, the accidental missed calls, the way they'd talk about plans, vacations, holidays, like I wasn't part of them. I'd given everything I had to them, thinking it would make me belong. But now I realized they'd never seen me as more than a placeholder for Henry, someone who'd eventually fade away. As I sat in my living room, alone with the pie I'd never served, I made a silent vow. They might have thought they could laugh me off, but they'd underestimated me. This widow wasn't finished yet. And karma, I decided, had a way of finding people who thought they were untouchable. That night, as I lay awake in the dark, the words, "Shut up, you widow," kept repeating in my mind like a broken record. I thought about all the times I'd shown up for them, whether it was babysitting, cooking for every holiday, or just listening when they needed an ear. And yet, they couldn't even give me the respect I deserved on a day that was supposed to be a celebration, a family dinner. I'd spent so many years trying to belong to them. Henry's passing had left a hole in my heart that I thought only family could fill. I'd told myself that if I gave enough, time, money, love, they'd see me as more than just a burden. But I was wrong. They'd taken everything I had and thrown it back in my face like I was nothing. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I got out of bed, my movements deliberate, my heart steady. I packed a single suitcase with the essentials, just enough clothes, my favorite books, the small wooden box where I kept Henry's watch and our wedding photo. I took one last look around the house that had once felt like a haven and now felt like a cage. When I reached the door, I paused. I'd always thought leaving meant giving up, but now I understood it meant taking back my power. I wasn't running away, I was choosing myself. Choosing to be the woman Henry had always believed I was, strong, resilient, and capable of building a life on my own. I got in the car and drove out of that town, the tires crunching on the gravel like a promise of freedom. I didn't look back. Every mile I put between me and their cruelty felt like shedding a weight I'd carried too long. I didn't know exactly where I'd end up, but I knew one thing. I'd never let anyone make me feel small again. I found a little rental cabin in the next town, a cozy place with a view of the lake and a porch swing where I could sip coffee in the mornings. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I called the utility companies, set up new accounts, and started over. Piece by piece, I built a life that no one could take from me. Every day, I woke up and chose to treat myself with the respect they never gave me. I read books, took walks by the water, learned how to cook meals for one without feeling lonely. I even joined a local book club, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time for when I was busy taking care of everyone else. That first week, I realized I didn't just survive, I started to thrive. Because sometimes, walking away isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of finding yourself. A few weeks had passed since I left that house and those people who treated me like a disposable afterthought. I'd settled into my new routine, morning coffee on the porch, afternoons reading by the lake, Evenings spent learning how to knit. I was healing, slowly but surely, and just as I began to find peace, the past came knocking in the most unexpected way. It started with a frantic voicemail from my niece. Her voice trembled as she told me that the family business, my late husband's small construction company that had kept the family afloat, had gone under. Mismanagement, unpaid taxes, and too many favors handed out to friends had finally caught up with them. They were in deep trouble. Debts piling up, legal notices on the door, and the bank threatening to seize the house I'd once called home. I listened to the message twice, once with disbelief, and then again with a strange sense of calm. They'd always thought they were untouchable, that they could take from me and never face consequences. But now karma had a seat at the table. That same afternoon, my phone buzzed with another call, this time from my sister-in-law. Her voice was brittle, desperate. "Caroline, we need your help. You've always been the strong one. We don't know what to do." I almost laughed, but the sound caught in my throat like a sob. Where was their strength when they called me worthless? When they dismissed me at that dinner table? Now they needed the widow they'd scorned. I let her words hang in the air for a long time before I spoke. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, my tone measured, calm. "But I don't think I can help this time." There was silence on the other end, followed by a choked gasp. "Caroline, please," she said. "We're family." Family. The word felt so thin and meaningless now. I'd given them everything: time, money, love, and they'd throw me away like trash. "I wish you all the best," I said, and ended the call. Later that evening, my son called. I could hear the panic in his voice. "Mom, please, just come back. We need you. I need you." I took a deep breath. "You needed me when you told me to shut up at that dinner," I said. "You needed me when you took and never gave back. I was there every time, and it was never enough." "Mom, I'm sorry," he whispered. A single tear rolled down my cheek, but my voice stayed strong. "I believe you're sorry, but sorry doesn't rebuild trust. Sorry doesn't erase the pain you caused." He tried to say more, but I gently ended the call. I didn't block him. I didn't hang up in anger. I simply chose not to let him and their drama back into my new life. I sat on the porch that night and watched the moonlight ripple across the lake. The air smelled of pine and possibility. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I'd been carrying for too long. They'd expected me to be their safety net again. They'd expected me to come running. But this time, I stood my ground. And in that quiet strength, I found a freedom I never knew I needed. Because sometimes, the best gift karma can give is the chance to say no to those who never deserved your yes.
That night, after the calls and the tears, I sat alone in my new apartment, the one I'd found with the help of a kind real estate agent who reminded me that I was never too old to start over. I curled up on my second-hand couch, a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands, and let the quiet fill the room like a balm. The silence wasn't the kind that used to haunt me after my husband passed. It was the kind that felt earned, like a moment of peace after a long battle. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who would have answered that frantic call and rushed back, no questions asked, ready to fix everything. I would have bailed them out, listened to their excuses, and played the role of family savior. But that woman had been too generous, too trusting. She'd believed that love meant sacrifice without limits, that family was an unbreakable bond. I was different now. Every betrayal I'd faced, every dismissive laugh, every time they told me to shut up, had left a mark, yes, but also a lesson. I'd learned that family can be the ones who hurt you the deepest, that sometimes love is used as a weapon. I'd learned that being there for others doesn't mean letting them walk all over you. As I sipped my tea, I replayed the dinner scene in my mind. The moment they'd told me to shut up like I was a nuisance, like my grief and my needs didn't matter. And I remembered how small I'd felt, how alone. But now, I saw it differently. Their words hadn't made me small. They'd revealed their own pettiness, their own weakness. I'd been strong all along. I just hadn't seen it. I thought about the call from my son, the desperation in his voice. It wasn't that he loved me more now. It was that he needed me. And maybe he did feel sorry. But sorry was too little, too late. I'd given enough. I'd poured myself into that family like a lifeline, and when I needed them, they'd let me drown. I got up from the couch and walked to the small table by the window, where a notebook lay open. I'd been writing down the things I wanted to do. Simple things. Gardening, joining a local art class, maybe even traveling somewhere I'd never been. I'd spent so much of my life thinking about what others needed from me. It was time to think about what I needed for myself. As the night stretched on, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in years. I'd let go of their hold on me. I'd chosen myself, my peace, my dignity, my future. I knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but it would be mine. And as I closed my notebook, I whispered to myself, I'm not their maid, their bank, or their emotional punching bag anymore. I'm Caroline Smith. I'm 67 years old, and I deserve a life where I'm respected. The wind rattled the window slightly, but I wasn't afraid of the noise anymore. I'd faced enough storms to know that I could handle this one too. That was the moment I knew I was truly free. Not from the pain, but from the obligation to keep giving to people who never gave back. And in that freedom, I found my strength and my peace. Has something like this ever happened to you? What would you do if your own family mocked your pain and then came crawling back when they needed you? Drop a comment below and share your story, because your voice matters, and you never know who it might help. And if my videos have ever inspired you, or if you think they might help someone you love, please make sure to hit that subscribe button. Every subscriber means more real stories reaching those who need them. Let's build a community of strength and support together.